The rain had a way of settling into the bones of the old Harrington house. Every gust of wind carried with it the faint smell of damp wood and iron, and the ceilings creaked as if the beams themselves remembered every storm that had passed over them. The house stood on the edge of Fairwood, a small town where gossip traveled faster than cars and memories stretched longer than lifetimes. For 20 years, the Harrington house had kept its secret locked away. The door was at the end of the upstairs hallway, painted the same faded cream as the others, but marked by a heavy brass padlock that had never been polished. Dust gathered thick at the frame. Spiders spun their homes undisturbed in the corners. The wallpaper around it had begun to peel, curling like old skin. To the family, the locked room was more than just a sealed chamber. It was a wound, scabbed, but never healed. It was Peter's room. He had been only 7 when he disappeared. One moment he was in the garden, chasing a red ball down the slope of the yard. The next he was gone. Police had searched the woods, dredged the river, combed every basement and shed in town. No footprints, no torn clothing, not a single trace. The Harringtons had been left with whispers and pitying glances from their neighbors, who crossed themselves whenever they passed the house. The Harringtons had locked the door to Peter's room a week after his disappearance. Margaret, his mother, had been the one to insist. "If we leave it open, it will never stop hurting. Let it stay closed until—" She never finished that sentence, and no one had asked her to. Now, 20 years later, the lock still hung there, and the house carried its silence like a shadow. The return of the siblings, Eleanor Harrington pulled her car into the gravel drive, her headlights flashing across the familiar facade. She hadn't been home in years, 10, maybe more. The ivy had crept higher along the brick walls, reaching the second-floor windows like green veins. She sat in the car for a moment, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel, before finally cutting the engine. Her younger brother, Daniel, stepped out of the passenger seat, stretching his arms and inhaling deeply. "Smells the same," he said, his breath clouding in the chill. Eleanor shot him a look. "Like mold and mothballs?" "That's comforting." Daniel only grinned. He was the optimist, always had been, even when optimism seemed like an insult. The front door opened before they reached it. Their mother, Margaret, stood framed in the glow of the hallway lamp. Time had bent her spine, silvered her hair, and lined her face, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You came," she said simply, voice rough but warm. She pulled them both inside with surprising strength. The house swallowed them in its familiar gloom. The carpeted hallway smelled faintly of lavender polish, though it couldn't hide the mustiness beneath. The grandfather clock in the living room ticked with its slow, relentless heartbeat. Their father, Richard, sat in his armchair by the fireplace, though no fire burned. He looked smaller than Eleanor remembered, shoulders hunched, his once dark hair now a snowy crown. A blanket covered his knees, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his children. "About time you came home," he said, managing a smile. They hadn't gathered like this in decades. It was Daniel's idea. He had insisted that they visit, claiming their parents were too old to be left alone in that house. Eleanor had resisted, but here she was, standing in the place where silence pressed against her ears and memories clawed at her chest. As they settled into the living room, the conversation flowed around ordinary things: Daniel's job, Eleanor's city apartment, Margaret's baking, Richard's medication. But beneath it all, unspoken and heavy, lay the locked door upstairs. Eleanor's eyes drifted toward the staircase, and Margaret noticed. Her lips tightened. "It's still locked," Margaret said, as if answering a question Eleanor hadn't asked. "It will always be locked." Daniel cleared his throat. "Has anything strange ever happened with it?" Richard's gaze flicked upward just for a second. "Houses make noises. You know that. It's nothing." But Eleanor felt the old prickle at the base of her neck, the same she used to feel when she tiptoed down that hall as a child, past the sealed door. The air there had always been colder. The neighbor's warning, the next morning, Eleanor went for a walk through town. Fairwood hadn't changed much. The bakery still stood on the corner, its windows fogged with warmth. The post office leaned with age, and old Mrs. Whitaker was still alive somehow, shuffling with her cane across Main Street. When she spotted Eleanor, her eyes widened. "Well, if it isn't one of the Harrington children," she croaked. "Back to the old house, are you?" Eleanor forced a polite smile. "Just visiting?" Mrs. Whitaker's cane tapped against the pavement. "Be careful, dear. That house. It doesn't forget." Eleanor stiffened. "What do you mean?" The old woman leaned closer, her breath sour with tea and age. "We all know what happened to your brother. Some say he wandered off. Some say worse. But me," her cloudy eyes seemed to sharpen. "Me, I heard him laughing. Nights after he was gone." "From your house?" "From that room." Eleanor's skin went cold. "That's impossible." The room was locked. Mrs. Whitaker only smiled, revealing her remaining yellow teeth. "Locked doors don't keep out everything." The house at night. That evening, Eleanor lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The wallpaper was faded now, the patterns of bluebirds nearly erased by time. The bed creaked whenever she shifted. Daniel snored faintly in the room next door. Then she heard it, a soft sound, drifting through the hallway, scratching, like fingernails dragging lightly against wood. Her breath caught. She sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, faint but steady. Not from the walls, not from outside. From the locked room. Eleanor crept out of bed, her feet cold against the wooden floorboards. The house seemed to watch her as she moved down the hall. The scratching stopped when she reached the door. She held her breath, pressing her ear against the cool surface. Silence, and then a child's laugh. It was faint, high-pitched, playful. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard in 2 decades. Her blood ran cold. She staggered back, hand clamped over her mouth. The padlock gleamed dully in the dim light, unbroken, untouched. The laugh echoed once more, before fading into silence. Eleanor fled down the hallway, her pulse hammering. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, sunlight tried to push its way through the grimy windows of the Harrington house, but the light never seemed to settle there. Shadows clung stubbornly to corners, as though the house itself resented being woken. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, pale and tight-lipped, staring into a mug of untouched coffee. Margaret busied herself at the stove, her movements sharp, defensive. Daniel entered with a yawn, stretching. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring himself a cup. Eleanor's jaw worked before she answered. "Did you hear it?" Daniel blinked. "Hear what?" "The scratching." The laughter, his brow furrowed, but there was amusement in his eyes. "Ellie, you always had an overactive imagination." Her hand slammed against the table, rattling the cups. "Don't you dare." "I heard him. I heard Peter." The kitchen fell silent. Margaret's back stiffened. Richard, who had been quietly reading the newspaper, lowered it slowly. "That room is locked," Margaret said coldly. "And it will stay that way." Eleanor's hands trembled. "You've heard it too, haven't you?" Neither parent spoke. Daniel set his cup down, unease creeping into his features. "Okay," he said cautiously. "Let's say you did hear something. Houses make noises, mice, pipes, whatever. That's all it was." But Eleanor wasn't convinced. The attic discovery later that day, Daniel suggested they help clear the attic. "If nothing else, it'll keep our minds off things," he said. Eleanor reluctantly agreed. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten years. Boxes of old toys, clothes yellowed with age, stacks of schoolbooks. Dust filled the air like smoke, catching in their throats. Eleanor rummaged through a box marked Peter. She found a crayon drawing of a house. This house, scribbled with a door in the hallway, circled over and over in thick red wax. The child's handwriting beneath it read, "Don't let them in." Her skin prickled. "Hey," Daniel called, crouching near an old trunk. "Look at this." He held up a small tarnished key. Brass, heavy, cold. Eleanor froze. She knew what it was before he said it. "The lock," Daniel whispered. "The key to Peter's room." The family argument. That evening, the siblings placed the key on the kitchen table. It gleamed under the dim light bulb, both ordinary and terrible. "We should open it," Daniel said firmly. "No." Margaret's voice was sharp. She snatched the key and closed her fist around it. "This house has been peaceful for years. We are not disturbing that room." "Peaceful?" Eleanor snapped. "You call this peaceful?" "There are sounds, voices. There is nothing there." Margaret's face flushed, her voice cracking. "Peter is gone, and nothing will bring him back. Leave the past where it belongs." Richard spoke quietly, his eyes never leaving the key. "Maybe it's time," he murmured. Margaret turned on him aghast. Richard, but Eleanor seized the moment. If Peter's in there, if he's been in there all this time, don't we owe it to him? The kitchen erupted in shouting. Eleanor demanding answers, Margaret forbidding it, Daniel trying to mediate, Richard staring into the past. The argument ended only when Margaret stormed off, slamming the bedroom door. The key remained on the table. Night terrors. That night, Eleanor dreamed of the room. She stood in the hallway, staring at the locked door, but in the dream, the door was breathing, wood expanding and contracting as if lungs were hidden within. From inside came the soft patter of footsteps, then the creak of a bed. A child's voice whispered, "Ellie, come play." The door swung open in the dream, and she saw Peter sitting on the edge of his bed. Grinning, his eyes black as oil, she woke gasping. Drenched in sweat, across the hall, Daniel dreamed too. He saw himself as a boy again, running through the house, chased by laughter that grew deeper, older, until it was no longer a child's at all. And downstairs, Richard sat sleepless in his chair, staring at the darkened staircase. Because he had heard it too, the scratching, the laughter, and he had been hearing it for years. He simply hadn't dared admit it. The lock turns. The following evening, Eleanor couldn't stand it any longer. She went to the hallway where the locked door waited. Daniel followed, the key trembling in his hand. "Are we really doing this?" he whispered. She nodded. The padlock seemed colder than the rest of the house. Dust swirled in the beam of their flashlight. The silence pressed in around them, heavy and expectant. Daniel slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, stiff from disuse, but then turned with a groan. The click echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. They both froze. From the other side of the door came the sound of something shifting. A faint thump, like a small body hopping down from a bed. Eleanor's breath hitched. The lock dropped into her palm. The door was free. The laugh echoed once more. Before fading into silence, Eleanor fled down the hallway, her pulse hammering. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The hallway seemed to hold its breath as the key slid free from the padlock. Eleanor's hand shook, the heavy lock cold in her palm. For a long moment, neither she nor Daniel moved. The door, tall and narrow, looked like any other in the house, yet the air around it felt wrong, too cold, too still, as if they stood at the edge of a deep well. Daniel glanced at her. "We don't have to do this tonight," but Eleanor shook her head. "If we wait, it'll only get worse." Her voice was steadier than she felt. She pressed her fingers against the knob. It was warm, warmer than the air around it, almost feverish. The hinges groaned as she pushed, the sound piercing through the silence of the house. The door swung inward, revealing the room that had been sealed for 20 years. It was as if time had stopped. The wallpaper was still a cheerful pale blue patterned with faded clouds. The bed was neatly made, the red ball Peter had chased that day resting against the footboard. Dust lay thick across the surfaces, yet everything else was untouched. A shelf of toys lined the wall, their plastic eyes staring blankly outward. And then they saw him. Peter sat on the bed, legs dangling, wearing the same striped shirt he'd worn the day he vanished. His hair was the same unruly brown, his cheeks still boyish and soft. He looked up at them and smiled. "Ellie, Danny, you finally came back." Eleanor staggered back against the wall. Her throat closed around his name. Daniel's mouth worked, but no words came. Peter slid off the bed, landing lightly on bare feet. "It's been so long. I missed you." His voice was bright, innocent, unchanged. Eleanor's hands trembled. "Peter, how are you here?" He tilted his head, confusion flickering across his features. "What do you mean?" "I've always been here. I told you I'd wait." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. "Wait, you've been here all this time?" "For 20 years. Peter's smile faltered, and for a moment his eyes seemed darker, too knowing. "It doesn't feel like that, not to me. Time is funny here." He glanced at the toys on the shelf. "They still talk to me, you know." "They kept me company." Eleanor's stomach turned. "Who kept you company?" Peter giggled, the same high-pitched laugh she'd heard in the hall. "The ones in the walls. They whisper when it's dark. They told me you'd come." The air grew colder. Eleanor felt something brush against her leg, though nothing was there. Daniel rubbed his arms, goose flesh rising. "Peter," Eleanor whispered. You should have been—" She stopped herself. Dead. That was the word she couldn't say. Peter stepped closer, his smile widening. Don't cry, Ellie, I'm not gone. I never left. His small hand reached for hers and instinctively she pulled back. His skin was too cold, like ice pressed against her fingers. Behind them, Richard's voice trembled from the hallway. God help us. Their parents stood at the threshold, Margaret pale as ash, her eyes locked on the boy she'd buried in her grief decades ago. She staggered forward, tears spilling, and whispered his name. Peter turned toward her, his expression softening into something almost tender. Mom. For a heartbeat, the family was suspended in silence, all staring at the impossible. Then the shadows in the corners of the room shifted. The toys on the shelf leaned forward ever so slightly as if watching. The ball rolled from the bed's edge, stopping at Eleanor's feet. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, bulging outward before settling back. Peter's eyes flicked toward the movement, then back at them. He grinned, wider this time. They're happy you're here. Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she thought the whole house must hear it. Margaret sank to her knees, sobbing, whispering thanks to God. Richard stood frozen, his face unreadable. Daniel finally found his voice. What are you? Peter's smile didn't falter. I'm your brother. But his shadow, stretching across the floor in the beam of the hallway light, was not the shadow of a child. The house no longer felt like theirs. Every room seemed to tilt toward the one at the end of the hall, as if the walls themselves leaned toward Peter's return. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Even when she closed her door and locked it, she felt him there, only a few steps away, listening. Margaret, though, was radiant. She hovered over Peter like a mother starved of air finally breathing again. She cooked his favorite meals, laid out clean clothes as though he hadn't missed a single school day. He's hungry, she whispered to Eleanor one night. Do you hear? He's hungry again. And she laughed through her tears, almost hysterical. But Peter hardly ate. He would sit at the dinner table, smiling politely, poking at the food. Sometimes he would lift the fork, but the bites never quite reached his mouth. He only watched them eat, his eyes bright, too bright. One evening, Daniel dropped his fork. Why don't you eat, Peter? You must be starving after everything. Peter looked at him, head tilted. They feed me. Eleanor's skin prickled. Who? Peter giggled. The ones in the walls. They whisper and feed me when it's dark. He leaned closer as if sharing a secret. They don't like it when you ask too many questions. Silence fell heavy over the table. Richard coughed, his face pale. Margaret scolded Eleanor with her eyes, as if daring her to challenge the boy's words. That night, Eleanor woke to the sound of humming. It was a lullaby, faint and sweet, drifting through the walls. She pressed her ear against the plaster and realized it wasn't coming from Peter's room. It was inside the wall itself. She staggered back, heart hammering. The humming continued, now joined by the soft scrape of nails. Scratching, dragging upward. She clamped her hands over her ears. But the sounds burrowed through her skull until she could hear the tune clearly. The same lullaby their mother used to sing when they were children. Down the hall, Daniel was awake too. He sat up in bed, staring at his window. On the glass, faint shapes pressed against the pane, like hands leaving prints from the outside. He couldn't move. The prints vanished as quickly as they appeared. The next morning, Peter sat in the living room, humming that same lullaby while playing with the red ball. His lips moved to words Eleanor couldn't hear, as though he carried on a conversation with someone invisible beside him. When she asked what he was doing, he looked at her with that sharp, too knowing gaze. They like you, he said. She swallowed. Who? He only smiled. That evening, Margaret insisted they all eat together again. She placed roasted chicken on the table, mashed potatoes, peas, as though preparing a holiday feast. Peter sat at the head of the table now, where Richard once sat. No one had spoken about it, but somehow the place had become his. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor dropped her spoon. Peter was staring at her, unblinking. His lips were still, yet inside her head, clear as her own thoughts, came a child's voice. Don't leave me again, Ellie. If you leave me, they'll take you instead. She pushed back from the table, chair scraping. Her parents scolded her, but she didn't hear them. She fled to her room, locking the door, trembling until morning. By the third night, Daniel was ready to confront it. That's not Peter, he hissed to Eleanor in the kitchen while their parents slept. It looks like him, it talks like him, but something's wrong. You see it too, Eleanor nodded, her face pale. What do we do? The answer came from the hallway. Peter stood there, his small frame outlined by the glow of the lamp. He smiled, though his eyes glittered with something that was not innocence. You don't have to whisper, he said softly. I hear everything. And the walls, as if echoing him, gave a low, shuddering groan. The days blurred. Morning felt no different from night inside the Harrington house. Light never seemed to linger, and every hour carried the same taut silence, broken only by Peter's voice. He had grown bolder. At first he followed Eleanor and Daniel like a shadow, padding silently behind them with his bare feet, asking innocent questions. Do you still like drawing, Ellie? Remember when you used to color the walls? Or, Danny, do you still hide candy under your pillow? Small details only their brother would know, details buried in the past. But then the questions changed. Ellie, why do you leave your window open at night if you're so afraid of the dark? Danny, why do you dream of drowning when you sleep? His eyes gleamed as he asked, as though he wasn't curious at all but already knew the answers. At night, the scratching grew worse. It spread beyond the hallway, into their bedrooms, even into the kitchen. Sometimes it sounded above them, sometimes below, always moving, restless, and beneath the scratching came whispers, dozens of voices overlapping, too soft to understand. Margaret refused to acknowledge any of it. She doted on Peter, brushing his hair, tucking him into bed as if he were still 7. She beamed when he called her mom in that sweet voice. But even she had begun to look thin, her cheeks hollow, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Richard hardly spoke anymore. He only watched, his gaze vacant, as though all his strength had drained out the night the door opened. One morning, Eleanor found Peter standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at their father in his chair. Richard was asleep, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Peter's lips moved in a silent rhythm, as if he were counting. Eleanor stepped closer. What are you doing? Peter didn't turn. His voice was soft. They're wondering how many breaths he has left. Her blood ran cold. Who's wondering? He finally looked at her, and for a heartbeat, his eyes were not a child's. They were endless, black, like windows into a pit with no bottom. The ones that kept me company, he whispered. They're hungry. That night Daniel shook Eleanor awake. His face was pale, his voice urgent. We can't stay here. We need to leave. Now. She sat up, heart pounding. And just leave them with him? We're not saving them, he hissed. Don't you see? Mom doesn't want to see it. Dad can't. If we don't go now, we'll never get out. The floorboards creaked. Both froze. At the door, Peter stood. The hallway light flickered behind him, making his shadow stretch unnaturally long across the floor. Going somewhere? He asked, voice light, sing-song. Neither spoke. Eleanor's breath caught as she realized his shadow was moving on its own, bending toward them, stretching fingers that scraped along the floorboards. Peter giggled. They don't like it when people try to leave. The light above them went out. The boy sat at the dinner table with them that night, his small hands folded neatly, his face smooth and pale in the dim yellow light of the chandelier. The parents could hardly stop staring, their forks hovering in the air, their eyes flicking between one another as though each needed the other's confirmation that what they saw was real. The boy ate slowly, mechanically, chewing in silence, his gaze fixed on his plate. He never once looked up at them, though he seemed aware of every word spoken, every anxious breath drawn. Anna tried to make conversation. She asked him if he remembered his old toys, his school, the games he once played. The boy nodded politely, even answered in a flat, steady voice, but his answers never went further than a few words. No stories, no laughter, just short acknowledgments that sounded rehearsed. Late that night, when the house had gone quiet, Michael was lying awake in his room when he heard the creak of footsteps in the hallway. At first he thought it was his father heading for the bathroom, but the sound was lighter, slower. He sat up in bed and listened. The steps stopped right outside his door. Then came the faintest whisper, his name. His chest tightened, and for a long moment he couldn't breathe. He opened his mouth to call out, but the voice came again, softer now and strangely distorted, like it was coming from 2 throats at once. Michael! He jumped up and yanked open the door. The hallway was empty. The next morning, their mother found the boy sitting in the locked room again, though the key had been returned to its place in the drawer. He sat cross-legged on the bed facing the wall, humming to himself. She asked him what he was doing, and he simply said, "Waiting." When she pressed him for what he was waiting for, he smiled faintly but didn't turn around. That day, the house felt heavier, as if the air itself was thick. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, refusing to retreat even when the lights were on. The family tried to continue their day as normal, but unease clung to them like damp clothes. At dinner, the boy finally looked up from his plate. His eyes, though still the same gray-blue as before, seemed bottomless, reflecting no light at all. "I'm glad you opened the door," he said quietly. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It's been so long since I could stretch my legs." The words struck them all into silence. The room seemed to tilt, the very walls pressing inward. Anna dropped her fork, and the clang echoed too loudly in the room. Their father tried to dismiss it as odd phrasing, a child's imagination, but deep inside, they all felt it, the dread coiling tighter, whispering that whatever sat at the table with them was not their lost boy. That night, the house did not sleep. The boy's words hung in the dining room like a foul odor that no one dared acknowledge. The father cleared his throat and forced a chuckle, trying to dismiss the unsettling statement. "Stretch your legs, huh? That's good, that's good. You must have been cramped up in there for too long." But his voice was trembling. The mother, pale and trembling, began clearing plates before anyone had finished eating. She couldn't bear to look at the boy anymore. The boy pushed back from the table, his small chair scraping harshly across the wood floor. "I'm tired," he said simply, and without waiting for permission, he left the room. His bare feet made no sound on the stairs, though the air seemed to stir as he passed. The family sat in silence long after he was gone, each of them staring into the shadows that had gathered in the corners. That night, Anna woke with a start. Her room was cold, colder than it had ever been before. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, but the chill sank into her skin, into her bones. She sat up, shivering, and noticed her breath fogging faintly in the dark. Her eyes were drawn to the far side of the room, where her desk stood cluttered with books and papers. Something was moving there. Slowly, she reached over and switched on her bedside lamp. The circle of light spilled across the room, revealing nothing out of place, except for the boy. He was standing beside her desk, his back to her, perfectly still. Anna gasped. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice quivering. The boy didn't move. He kept his back turned, shoulders stiff, head tilted slightly as if listening to something. Anna slid out of bed cautiously, keeping her distance. Her heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. Finally, the boy turned. His face was blank, expressionless, his eyes unfocused. But his lips were moving, shaping words she could not hear. It was like he was speaking to someone far away, someone only he could see. Anna took a step back, but her heel hit the leg of her bed. She froze. The boy suddenly smiled, wide and unnatural, his teeth too sharp in the dim light. "They're almost here," he said softly. Then, without another word, he slipped out of her room, leaving the door ajar behind him. Anna collapsed onto her bed, trembling violently. She wanted to scream, to wake her parents, but something deep inside her whispered not to, that making noise would only draw attention. She lay awake until dawn, her lamp burning, staring at the open door. The next morning, Michael found her at the kitchen table, pale and hollow-eyed, her hands shaking as she gripped her mug of tea. She told him what she had seen, her voice hushed, terrified. Michael tried to reassure her. "Maybe you were dreaming. We're both stressed out. You know how the mind plays tricks when you're tired." But even as he spoke, he remembered the whisper outside his door 2 nights before. He hadn't told anyone about that. Now he wasn't sure it had been a trick of the mind at all. Their mother avoided the boy entirely that day, keeping herself busy in the garden, though her hands trembled so badly she kept cutting the flowers wrong. Their father tried to cling to reason, insisting they were overreacting, that trauma and stress explained everything. But when night fell, even he seemed reluctant to be near the boy. That evening, they gathered in the living room to watch television, hoping for some sense of normalcy. The boy sat on the carpet, cross-legged, staring not at the screen but at the blank wall beside it. He tilted his head at odd angles as though studying something invisible. Occasionally he giggled, soft, childlike, but utterly wrong. At one point, he turned suddenly and caught Michael watching him. His smile stretched, too wide for his small face, and he whispered, "They like you." Michael's stomach dropped. "Who likes me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy blinked slowly, then turned back to the wall without answering. That night the scratching began. At first it was faint, just a light rasping noise from upstairs, easy to dismiss as the settling of the old house. But it grew louder, sharper, until it sounded like nails raking across wood. The family lay awake, listening, hearts racing. It was coming from the locked room. The father, desperate to prove it was nothing, grabbed the key and stormed upstairs, the rest trailing behind him in fear. He flung the door open. The room was as it had always been, dusty, frozen in time. Nothing moved, but the scratching didn't stop. It was louder now, though no one could tell where it came from. The boy stood in the corner, smiling faintly, his head bowed. "They're waiting," he said. The sound ceased abruptly, plunging the house into silence. Over the next days, the house seemed to unravel. The temperature shifted violently from sweltering heat to bone-numbing cold. Lights flickered even when the power was steady. Shadows moved when no one did. At night, whispers curled through the hallways, speaking in voices that were almost familiar. Voices of loved ones long dead. Calling names, begging to be let in. Anna stopped sleeping altogether. Dark circles bruising her eyes. Michael began carrying a flashlight everywhere, jumping at every sound. Their mother wept quietly in her room, praying under her breath. Their father aged 10 years in a week, his face drawn and weary. The boy, however, thrived. He grew more animated, more talkative, though the things he said were nonsense. Sometimes he described places none of them had ever seen, endless corridors lined with doors, a sky made of teeth, rivers that whispered secrets. Other times he would sit at the piano and play haunting melodies, though he had never learned before. One evening, as the family sat in tense silence around the dinner table, the boy suddenly dropped his fork and said, "It's almost time." The words froze them all. "Time for what?" the father asked, trying to sound stern. The boy looked at him with eyes that seemed far older than any child's. "For the door to open again. You thought you let me out, but you only let them in." The room went dead silent. The air thickened, pressing down on their lungs. For a long moment, no one could move. Then the chandelier above them began to sway, though there was no draft. The light flickered, dimmed, and went out, plunging them into darkness. In the silence that followed, they heard it, dozens of tiny hands scratching, clawing, dragging across the walls all around them. The boy's laughter rose in the dark, soft and gleeful, echoing through the house. The scratching didn't stop that night. It moved, crawling along the walls, circling the house like something prowling just out of sight. The family huddled together in the living room, the only lamp flickering faintly, casting shadows that shifted unnaturally across the walls. Every time the bulb dimmed, they swore they saw shapes forming in the corners, elongated figures, bent and watching. The boy sat cross-legged on the rug, humming to himself. His tune was cheerful, almost like a nursery rhyme, but the way he sang it, low, deliberate, each note drawn out, made it unbearable to listen to. Their mother covered her ears, rocking slightly as if she could block it out. "Stop it," Michael snapped finally. "Just stop." The boy tilted his head, smile widening. "They like when I sing." No one asked who they were anymore. Asking only made him smile more. Around midnight, the whispers began again. Not from the hallways this time, but from within the room itself. At first it was faint, a murmur like wind through leaves, but then words began to form. They came from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath their feet. Voices overlapping, hundreds of them, speaking in tones that rose and fell like a tide. Anna clutched her brother's arm, trembling violently. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, though she knew he did. "Yes," Michael breathed, his eyes wide. Their father stood abruptly, trying to appear strong, though his knees shook. "Enough!" he barked. "This is our house. Our family. I won't have it any longer." He turned to the boy. "Whatever game you're playing ends now." The boy looked up at him with mock innocence. "But it's not my game. It's theirs." The lamp flickered violently, then burst with a sharp pop, plunging them into darkness. The whispers surged, louder now, pressing against their ears, their skulls. The family screamed, stumbling to their feet, clawing blindly for each other. The boys' laughter rang out clear and sharp above the chaos, and then silence. Utter silence, as if the world itself had drawn a breath and held it. When Michael finally managed to flick on his flashlight, the room was empty. The boy was gone. They searched the house in a frenzy, calling his name despite their fear, but he was nowhere. The locked room door stood wide open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Michael's flashlight beam swept across the inside, and he froze. The room had changed. It was no longer a child's bedroom frozen in time. The walls were wrong, too long, stretching into shadows that the light couldn't penetrate. The floor sagged in places, boards warped and splitting, though no dust covered them now. The air was damp and foul, smelling of rot and soil. And faintly, so faintly, there was the sound of breathing. Not one breath, but many, layered atop each other like a choir of lungs. Anna screamed, slamming the door shut, but it rattled violently as if something on the other side pushed back. They shoved a dresser against it, then another, until the doorway was barricaded. That night, none of them slept. They sat together in the living room, jumpy at every creak, every sigh of wind. Their mother prayed aloud until her voice grew hoarse. Their father sat with his head in his hands, muttering that he should never have opened the door. The boy did not return until dawn. They found him sitting calmly at the kitchen table, legs swinging idly, a glass of milk in front of him. He looked up and smiled as though nothing had happened. "Where were you?" Anna demanded, her voice cracking. "Playing," he said simply. "With who?" Michael pressed, his voice low, dangerous. The boy tilted his head, feigning thought. "With my friends." The siblings exchanged a glance, terror and rage mixing in their eyes. But before they could speak, the boy leaned forward, his smile vanishing. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "They don't like when you shut the door." The house groaned around them as though in agreement, the very walls trembling faintly. Over the next days, the family unraveled further. Their mother stopped eating, claiming she could taste earth in every bite. Their father took to pacing the halls at night, muttering under his breath, a knife always in hand. Anna began sketching without realizing it, filling page after page with drawings of doors, tall, thin, endless rows of doors. And Michael, who tried the hardest to keep sane, began to hear voices even when he left the house. They followed him, calling softly from behind trees, from the hum of traffic, from the silence between heartbeats. The boy, meanwhile, only grew healthier, stronger. His cheeks flushed with color, his eyes gleamed with something far too intelligent, far too knowing. Sometimes he would vanish for hours, only to reappear without explanation, dirt under his fingernails. His clothes damp with dew, though he had never left the house. One night Michael confronted him directly. He found the boy sitting on the landing of the stairs, staring at nothing. "What are you?" Michael demanded. His voice cracked, but he stood his ground. "You're not our brother. You're not even human. What are you?" The boy turned slowly, his face blank. For a long moment he said nothing, and Michael thought he wouldn't answer at all. But then his lips curled upward, just slightly. "I'm what you called," he said simply. Michael's blood ran cold. "We didn't call you." The boy tilted his head. "Opening is calling." And with that, he stood and walked away, humming his dreadful tune once more. That night the barricaded door upstairs began to knock. Not scratch, knock, slow, deliberate, heavy. Each thud shook the walls, rattled the windows, vibrated in their teeth. The knocking went on for hours, until the sun rose and the house fell silent again. By then, the family knew. The door would not stay shut forever, and whatever was on the other side was still waiting to come through. The knocking became part of their nights. At first it came only after midnight, steady and patient, but soon it began earlier, as though the thing behind the door was growing bolder. Sometimes the knocks came from above, sometimes below, sometimes from the walls around them. No room was safe. They tried ignoring it, tried drowning it out with music, with television, with prayers. But the sound seeped through everything, a heartbeat that belonged not to the house, but to something inside it. One evening, as the family sat huddled in the living room, the boy appeared at the threshold. His hair hung messily over his face, his clothes smeared with dust. He looked almost feral, yet calm, like a predator returning to its den. He tilted his head and asked in a sing-song tone, "Why are you hiding? Don't you want to see?" Their father stood abruptly, his nerves fraying at last. "See what?" he snapped, voice hoarse from nights without sleep. The boy's lips curved into a faint smile. "What you let in." Anna clutched her father's arm, whispering for him not to argue, but rage had taken him. He stormed toward the stairs, toward the locked room. Michael and Anna tried to stop him, shouting, pulling at his arms, but he shook them off with a strength that surprised even him. The boy trailed behind, humming that dreadful tune. When their father reached the barricade, he began tearing at it wildly, dragging the dresser aside, pulling the heavy wardrobe with a strength born of desperation. The furniture scraped and groaned against the floor, the sound echoing through the house like a death knell. "No," their mother cried, stumbling after them. "Don't open it again." But the barricade was gone now. The door stood bare before them, its wood quivering as if alive. The knocking had stopped, leaving only silence. Their father turned the key in his trembling hands. "Dad, please," Michael begged. The father's jaw clenched. "We can't live like this anymore. We'll face it. Whatever it is, we'll end it tonight." He slid the key into the lock. The click rang out like thunder. The boy giggled softly. The door swung inward. Darkness, deeper than any shadow, filled the room. It seemed to breathe, to pulse. The smell of earth and rot poured out, gagging them. Their flashlights cut only shallow paths into the gloom, swallowed quickly by the dark. The room was larger now, impossibly so, stretching into a space that could not exist inside their house. Shapes stirred at the edges of the light. Thin, elongated figures that bent at impossible angles, their movements jerky and insect-like. Whispers rose in unison, a chorus of voices overlapping, growing louder, closer. Their father raised the knife he had carried for days, his hand shaking violently. "Stay back!" he shouted into the dark, but the figures only came closer, slipping in and out of the shadows, their bodies indistinct, their faces blurred as though they belonged to too many people at once. The boy stepped past them, unafraid, and into the darkness. The shadows parted for him, folding away like curtains. He turned to look back at them, his eyes glowing faintly, unnaturally, reflecting no light but burning with their own. "See?" he whispered. "They've been waiting for you." The mother screamed and slammed the door shut. The father dropped the knife, his face white with terror. Together they shoved the barricade back into place, piling furniture against the door as the whispers rose, furious now, clawing at the wood. The boy was gone again. That night the knocking became pounding, violent and relentless, shaking the very foundation of the house. Pictures crashed from the walls, glass shattered, doors downstairs flew open and slammed shut. The family huddled in the kitchen, clutching each other, certain the house would collapse. But it never did. By dawn, the pounding stopped. The house lay in ruins, furniture overturned, walls cracked. Exhausted, broken, they tried to flee. They packed bags, threw clothes into suitcases, gathered keys. But when they opened the front door, there was nothing beyond it. No street, no sky, no world. Only darkness, vast and unending, stretching in every direction. Anna screamed, slamming the door shut. When she opened it again, the darkness was still there. "We're trapped," Michael whispered, his face pale. "The house isn't in the world anymore." The boy returned at noon as if nothing had happened, sitting calmly at the table with a piece of bread in his hand. He looked at them with amusement. "You can't leave," he said lightly. "Not until it's finished." Their father snapped, lunging at him with wild fury, but the boy vanished before his hands could close around him. One moment there, the next gone, leaving only the sound of laughter echoing faintly through the house. Days bled into each other. Time no longer felt real. Sometimes the clocks raced, the hands spinning uncontrollably. Sometimes they froze. Hunger gnawed at them, thirst weakened them, but the kitchen always had food, just enough to keep them alive. Bread that never went stale, milk that never spoiled. None of them dared to ask where it came from. The boy came and went as he pleased. Sometimes he appeared in the hallway, sometimes in their bedrooms as they slept, sometimes crouched at the foot of their beds, watching silently until they woke screaming. His voice seeped into their minds even when he wasn't there, whispering promises, taunting them, reminding them that the door would open again, that the waiting would end. Anna began to unravel first. She stopped speaking, stopped eating, her eyes hollow. She would sit for hours staring at the walls, her lips moving silently. One night, Michael woke to find her gone. He searched desperately, finally discovering her in the locked room, the barricade shoved aside. She stood inside the threshold, smiling faintly, her arms open as if welcoming someone. Michael dragged her back, screaming as whispers poured out of the darkness, louder than ever, furious at being denied. The next day, Anna would not look at him. "They're kind," she whispered. "Kinder than you think. They'll take us somewhere better." Michael slapped her, desperate to break whatever spell she was under. But the damage was done. Their father grew violent, lashing out at shadows, screaming at voices no one else heard. Their mother wasted away, muttering prayers that never reached heaven. And Michael, who tried to stay strong, felt madness creeping at the edges of his mind. Only the boy thrived, and every night the door pounded louder. The pounding shook the house with such violence that plaster rained from the ceiling. The barricade upstairs rattled, groaning under the force of the blows. Each strike was louder, harder, as if the things behind the door had grown stronger, angrier, impatient with waiting. Michael held his ears, crouched against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion. He hadn't slept in days. None of them had. The sound never stopped anymore. Day or night, the door wanted to open. Their father sat at the dining table, knife in hand, muttering nonsense. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, darting to the corners as if following unseen shapes. Their mother rocked in a chair, pale and skeletal, whispering prayers to herself. Anna lingered near the stairs, always staring up at the locked room, her lips curved in a faint smile that never left her face. And then there was the boy. He stood at the foot of the staircase, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, humming his endless tune. He looked stronger than ever, taller somehow, his skin flush with health. The house fed him, Michael realized. Or worse, he fed the house. Michael forced himself to his feet, swaying. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice hoarse from screaming over the pounding. The boy stopped humming. Slowly, he turned, his eyes meeting Michael's. They gleamed in the dim light, not with innocence but with hunger. "I already told you," he said softly. "I'm what you called." "We didn't call you," Michael shouted, fists clenching. "We didn't want this." The boy's smile spread unnaturally wide. Opening his wanting, the pounding stopped. The silence was worse. It was deep, suffocating, as if the house itself held its breath. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of children laughing. Dozens of them, high-pitched and playful, like recess in a schoolyard. But the laughter was wrong, too sharp, too echoing, too layered. It carried down the stairs, filling every room, bouncing off the walls until it was impossible to tell where it came from. Anna giggled suddenly, her shoulders shaking. She covered her mouth but couldn't stop. "Don't you hear them?" she said, her voice dreamy. "They're waiting for us." "Stop it," Michael snapped, grabbing her arm, but she pulled away with surprising strength. Her eyes glistened with feverish light. "They're not bad," she whispered. "They only want to play." Their father leapt to his feet, knife raised. "We end this now," he roared, charging for the stairs. "Dad, no!" Michael screamed, but it was too late. The boy stepped aside, watching with calm amusement as their father ripped away the barricade with his bare hands, wood splintering under his frantic grip. He flung the door open. The darkness rushed out like a flood. It poured across the floor, across the walls, swallowing light, swallowing sound. The laughter turned to screams, hundreds of them, shrill and agonized. Figures poured through the doorway, tall, thin, grotesque, their limbs stretching, bending, snapping. Faces blurred, flickering between familiar and alien. Hands clawed the air, grasping, pulling. Their father charged forward, slashing with his knife, but the shadows enveloped him, dragging him into the dark. His screams echoed for only a moment before vanishing. Their mother collapsed, sobbing, as Anna clapped her hands together like a child watching fireworks. "They're here," she cried. "They're finally here." Michael grabbed her, shaking her violently. "They'll kill us." "Don't you see? They'll take everything." But Anna only smiled, eyes glassy. "That's what they promised. They'll take us away." The boy stepped into the threshold, spreading his arms as though welcoming royalty. The figures parted for him, bowing their twisted heads. He looked back at Michael, his smile stretching wider and wider until it split his cheeks. "You gave me back my door," he said, "and now I'll give you to them." Michael dragged his mother to her feet, screaming at her to run, though there was nowhere to go. The front door still opened only to darkness. The windows looked out into endless void. The house was an island, floating in something that wasn't the world anymore. The shadows surged forward, filling the stairwell, spilling into the hallway. Michael shoved Anna aside and pulled his mother toward the kitchen. The air grew heavier, hotter, vibrating with whispers that clawed at his mind. His vision swam, but he forced himself forward. The boys' laughter followed him. They reached the back door. Michael yanked it open, praying for escape, but the void stretched there too. Only blackness. Only nothing. His mother collapsed, wailing, "We can't get out. We can't get out!" Michael slammed the door shut, his chest heaving. His mind raced. If they couldn't leave, then they had to fight. But how do you fight something that wasn't flesh, wasn't human? Something that lived in shadows and laughter and whispers? He grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and held it in trembling hands. His mother clutched a rosary, muttering prayers that no longer had power here. The pounding resumed, not at the door this time, but everywhere. Beneath their feet, above their heads, inside their own skulls. The walls buckled, cracking as if the house itself was alive and straining to hold what was inside. Anna's laughter echoed from the stairwell. She was walking toward the locked room, arms outstretched, welcoming the dark. "Anna!" Michael screamed, sprinting after her. He caught her at the threshold, yanking her back just as one of the figures reached for her. Its hand was long, skeletal, fingers tipped with jagged claws. The touch burned his skin even as he swung the poker with all his strength, striking the creature across its blurred face. It shrieked, a sound that rattled the windows, and dissolved back into the shadows. But there were more. Dozens more. Anna fought him, shrieking, clawing at his arms. "Let me go! They're waiting for me!" Michael dragged her down the stairs, his muscles screaming, his mind fracturing. The boy watched from the landing, his smile gone now, his eyes burning with something darker. "You can't fight forever," he said softly. "The house is theirs. You are theirs. Even now, you belong to them." Michael's vision blurred with rage and terror. "Then I'll burn the house down," he spat. The boy tilted his head, almost curious. "Try." Michael dragged Anna to the living room, shouting for his mother to help. Together they forced Anna into a chair, tying her wrists with torn sheets while she writhed and screamed. Michael struck a match from the box near the stove. His hands shaking violently, the flame flickered weakly, the only light in the suffocating dark. For the first time, the boy's smile faltered. Michael held the match high. "If the house is theirs," he growled, "then I'll take it away from them." He dropped the match into the curtains. The flames spread quickly, racing up the fabric, leaping across the walls. The house groaned, shrieking in protest. The shadows surged, writhing in panic, their whispers turning to screams. The boy screamed too, high, shrill, inhuman. His face twisted, his eyes glowing like coals. The figures poured from the locked room, but the fire consumed them as it spread, their forms dissolving into ash and smoke. The walls buckled, the ceiling collapsed, the air filled with choking heat and screams. Michael grabbed his mother, dragging her through the smoke, toward the front door. Anna fought against her bindings, screaming not in pain, but in fury, calling to the shadows. The boy's voice rose above it all. "You can't escape. This house is forever. You opened the door. You are the door." The fire roared, swallowing his words. Michael reached the front door and pulled it open. For one terrible moment, the void still waited beyond. Endless blackness, hungry and vast. Then, through the smoke and heat, he saw it. A faint glow, far in the distance. Light. He shoved his mother through, dragging her into the void. The fire consumed the house behind them, Anna's screams echoing until they were lost in the roar of flames. The last thing Michael saw before the house collapsed into nothing was the boy, standing in the doorway of the locked room, his body burning, his smile stretched wide, his eyes blazing. And then the house was gone. Michael and his mother fell into the light. They landed hard, tumbling across rough ground. Michael gasped, his lungs burning, his throat raw from smoke. His mother lay beside him, coughing violently, her frail body trembling with every heave. For a moment, he didn't move. He just lay there, staring upward, bracing for the shadows, for the boy, for the house that should have followed them. But the sky above was no longer black. It was dawn, a pale golden light stretched across the horizon, soft and almost unreal after so much darkness. Michael blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of it. They were lying on grass, wet, cold, fresh with morning dew. Birds sang in the distance, their songs piercingly clear. It looked like the world. It felt like the world. But was it? His mother clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide and wet with fear. Are we back?" she whispered. Michael sat up slowly, scanning the landscape. They were in a wide meadow ringed by trees. A dirt road wound across the distance, leading toward what looked like rooftops. A village, maybe. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. He could smell it, wood smoke, earth, grass. For the first time in what felt like forever, he couldn't hear the house. No pounding, no whispers, no laughter. He helped his mother sit up, holding her as she wept with relief. For a while they just sat together, listening to the wind and the birds, neither daring to move too quickly, afraid it would all vanish if they acknowledged it. But then behind them, something cracked. Michael whipped around. The field was empty. The house was gone. But in the dirt where they'd landed, there was a shape burned into the earth, black, charred, smoldering faintly. It was the outline of a door. Michael's heart sank. His mother saw it too. Her sobs quieted, her hands clutching her rosary until her knuckles went white. "It's not over," she whispered. He stood, forcing himself to face it. The door wasn't solid, not really, just a mark, a scar in the ground. But as he stared, he swore he saw it shimmer, as if something still pressed against the other side. Waiting. The boy's words echoed in his head. "You are the door." Michael staggered back, shaking his head. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." His mother gripped his hand. "We need to leave, now, before it follows." They stumbled toward the dirt road, supporting one another. The village in the distance grew closer with every painful step. He could see figures now, people moving, carrying baskets, tending fires. They looked normal. Human. Michael's chest ached with desperate hope. Maybe they'd escaped. Maybe it was really over. But when they reached the first fence, a farmer tending to his field looked up. His eyes locked on Michael, and the farmer smiled. It was small at first, faint. But as Michael froze, the smile widened. Wider, wider, until it stretched too far, splitting his cheeks like the boy's. The farmer's lips parted, and from his throat spilled a sound Michael knew too well, high-pitched laughter, layered, echoing, impossible to belong to one person. Michael staggered back, dragging his mother. The other villagers turned at the sound. One by one, their faces lit with the same impossible smile. The same laughter poured from their mouths, weaving into a chorus that filled the air, drowning the birds, drowning the wind. His mother clutched him, her nails digging into his arm. "Michael," she whispered, her voice broken. "We never left." The laughter swelled. Michael spun, looking back at the meadow. The blackened outline of the door was gone. In its place, standing alone in the grass, was the house, whole, waiting. The boy stood in the doorway, humming his tune. He raised his hand and waved. Michael screamed. The world folded in on itself like paper. When Michael opened his eyes again, he was standing in the living room. The curtains were intact, the walls unburned. The air was heavy with silence. His mother was beside him, trembling. Anna sat in her chair, smiling faintly, as if nothing had happened. And upstairs the pounding began again. Michael dropped to his knees, sobbing. The truth crashed over him like icy water. There was no escape. The house wasn't in the world. The house was the world now. Everything beyond its walls was just another layer, another trick. The boy stepped out from the stairwell, his humming louder now, resonant, filling every room. His eyes gleamed with triumph. "You see?" he whispered, kneeling beside Michael. "There is no outside. There is only the door, and you are keeping it open." Michael wanted to fight, to scream, to deny it. But deep inside, he knew the boy was right. Every attempt to run only brought them back. Every act of defiance only tightened the noose. The house wasn't a place. It was a prison, and he was the key. The boy leaned close, his lips almost touching Michael's ear. "Forever," he whispered. The pounding grew louder. The walls shook. The ceiling cracked. The laughter returned. Michael closed his eyes, and the door opened. The end.